The Last of Us 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. There's probably going to be at least one person who immediately clicks off the video upon hearing me say that. But no, really, The Last of Us is one of my favorite gaming franchises of all time. I think both games are phenomenal, and I think that's all the more motivation to vent about how disappointing the latest season of the HBO adaptation is. And yes, I know, I'm horrendously late to the party. I don't give a shit. I only just got around to seeing the new season these last few nights. I wasn't in any particular rush to see it, especially after hearing how bad it supposedly was. In these last few months, I was busy binging a bunch of Hell's Kitchen seasons because I love that show and Gordon Ramsay shows in general. Anyway, I think the first major sin of this season that comes to my mind is substituting the initial ambiguity of the game's story with instead spoon-feeding the audience in the form of, right off the fucking bat, literally the very first scene in this season, laying out that Abby and her crew are going to set out to kill Joel, which completely rocks the foundation of the narrative. In the game, you don't know right away who Abby and her crew are and what their motivation is. You get the feeling that they have some kind of nefarious intent, but are likely still blindsided when the rug is pulled out from under you, and Abby proceeds to torture Joel after he just saved her life from a giant horde of infected. And that shock and initial ambiguity around why Abby murdered Joel in such a fashion is part of the point of the entire fucking story. You're supposed to see red with Ellie and share the same bloodlust for Abby as she does, because initially you and her have the same perspective. Abby ripped away a beloved character, or in Ellie's case, a father figure, and her group need to pay for what they've done. Instead, the show has Abby monologuing to Joel just as she's about to torture him about how he killed her father, who was the head doctor in the Firefly Hospital at the very end of the first game and season, that was about to perform surgery on Ellie that would have killed her and hopefully would have resulted in a vaccine that would have cured the cordyceps virus. The show tries so hard to make you right off the bat sympathize with Abby, and it just doesn't land because it is such a 180 from the original story, which was predicated on the fact that different perspectives can radically alter your view on a person. From Ellie's point of view, Abby is a monstrous piece of shit who murdered her surrogate father, who she was just about to reconcile with, and I'll get more into that a little later. She, and us the player, didn't know that Joel did pretty much the exact same thing to Abby, what she did to Ellie, much like how from Abby's perspective, Joel is this savage smuggler who, one, murdered like half of the Fireflies at least, in the hospital, plus Marlene, two, likely doomed humanity by rescuing Ellie, and three, most importantly to her, he murdered her father. She isn't aware of the context that explains Joel's actions at the end of the first game. She doesn't know the bond that Joel and Ellie formed over the course of the game. She doesn't know that Joel already lost his biological daughter and wasn't about to go through that loss all over again with what is essentially a surrogate daughter by that point of the story. I mean, it's not like I think her perspective would change all that much if she did know all of that information, considering he murdered her fucking father. But that's still the point the game was trying to convey. One person's monster is another person's loved one, and it's all based on information that recontextualizes the purpose behind that person's actions. Abby was Ellie and the player's monster for the first half of the game, until we enter the back half of the game where we begin to play as Abby, and we learn that from her perspective, Joel is the monster. Whether or not you think the game does an adequate enough job in getting you to sympathize with Abby is irrelevant. The point is, the reveal of the motivation behind Abby murdering Joel happening, when the perspective change happens, makes the initial ambiguity of the story all the more impactful, because it forces you to feel uncomfortable with your initial perspective on Abby, and asks you to do a little self-reflection. Meanwhile, what is the impact when the show reveals at the end of the season that the next season is going to follow Abby's perspective? The show already tried to make you sympathize with her by immediately giving away her motivation behind killing Joel, so the reveal that we're now going to follow the quote-unquote villain's perspective isn't as impactful and isn't as much of a punch to the gut as it is in the game, because unlike the game, up until this point of the story, we weren't just exclusively given Ellie's perspective, which was heavily skewed by visceral hatred and blind rage. And speaking of Ellie, I really didn't like her this season. It feels like she hasn't matured one iota in the 5-year time gap between the first season and this season. And look, no shade to Bella Ramsey, they've been getting a lot of weird hate from people who don't realize there's a lot more that goes into a bad performance than just simply not being a good actor, which I don't believe they are. I think they did a good job in season 1, and I also enjoyed their stint in Game of Thrones. And there have also been a lot of these really weird memes made about them because, oh, they supposedly have a weird face or some stupid arbitrary shit like that. It's another instance of the internet unnecessarily waving their pitchforks at someone who ultimately isn't responsible for a product being subpar. Writing and direction also play a factor into why a performance may be poor. And the way Ellie was written in this season is just so fucking stupid. She's dumb, incompetent. Dina is the one who does most of the planning and has to constantly rein in Ellie from making a stupid, impulsive decision. Like she's a mother having to explain to her dumb, impulsive daughter to not be, well, dumb and impulsive. And Dina is the one mostly getting her hands dirty in what is supposed to be Ellie's revenge quest. And Ellie's demeanor during this, again, revenge quest is just so fucking baffling. It does not match the tone of the situation they are in at all. She's constantly cracking jokes and one-liners, not taking the situation seriously at all. And it makes me wonder whose fucking revenge quest is this in the first place? It seems like Dina's way more affected by Joel's death than Ellie is. Initially, I did like that the show made Dina and Joel have a much closer relationship than they had in the game. And having Dina be there with Joel when he died instead of Tommy, not that I think these changes are necessarily better than what was in the game, but I still thought they were interesting in the sense of, on top of Dina being Ellie's emotional support and backup during this revenge quest, there is also shared trauma between them, making this quest deeply personal for both of them. But instead they make Ellie this incompetent fucking idiot, making her not act that much different from how she was when she was 14, 5 years prior, and making her more like Dina's comic relief sidekick who gets into jams that Dina needs to bail her out from. Same with Jesse when he appears, then someone who just had their fucking father figure murdered and is on a revenge quest to kill their father figure's murderer. And speaking of Jesse, as a quick aside, what the fuck is he doing in Seattle? It makes sense why he's there in the game. He says he looked up to Joel and what happened to him was fucked up, and he also wanted to provide support and backup for his friend and his ex-girlfriend who is currently pregnant with his child. But in the show, he is someone who really prioritizes the needs of the community in Jackson and reveals to Ellie later on that he was always against this revenge quest. He's constantly pissed off at Ellie more than what is justified in my opinion, like he was forced to go to Seattle. Within the context of his show version character, he feels so shoehorned in. Anyway, with Ellie being the unserious, bumbling idiot she is in this season, it just completely wrecks the dynamic between her and Dina that was in the game, and completely wrecks her character in general. We don't see enough of her descent into being completely consumed by rage and desire for revenge. The player witnesses just how much Ellie's trauma causes her to lose her humanity and is the driving force behind the frankly awful things she does in the game. Dina in the game is the light trying to pull her away from the darkness. Post-Seattle and pre-Santa Barbara, Ellie and Dina are living a quiet life in a farmhouse, raising Dina and Jesse's baby, that Ellie can't fully enjoy because of the lingering trauma surrounding Joel's death, that eventually sets her out to try and kill Abby, again. The type of life that Ellie and Dina were living is the picturesque, quiet life that would be the light in Ellie's life, that her trauma doesn't allow her to fully enjoy. But this light and dark dynamic, and this future conundrum that the show will eventually get to, is rendered null and void when Ellie is just simply following Dina around, smiling and cracking jokes, and seeming like she's not that influenced or affected by the trauma of watching her father figure die. One more thing I'll talk about that I don't like is how the show handled Ellie and Joel's relationship in the 5-year gap between the first season and the second season. In the game, told through a series of flashbacks, Ellie initially tries to take a stab at the typical father-daughter relationship with Joel, and tries to live the childhood she was robbed of, like for example, she loves dinosaurs in space, and for her birthday in one flashback, Joel took her to a museum. But in the back of her mind, she knows that something doesn't add up in Joel's lie, that there are supposedly dozens of other immune people out there, and there is no hope at a vaccine being created. And eventually, in a later flashback, flashback, Ellie travels back to the Firefly Hospital and finds out that she was indeed the only known immune person, and that Joel squandered quite possibly the only opportunity humanity had at developing a cure. She then finally gets the truth out of Joel, and as you can imagine, that is earth-shattering for her. For her, her immunity was her purpose, and Joel robbed her from fulfilling what she felt was her purpose, with the catastrophic consequence of robbing humanity of quite possibly its only shot at developing a cure for the cordyceps added on top of that. And so she cuts off Joel for, I believe, 3 years, up until just before he dies. In the show, a lot of the turmoil is instead typical angsty teenage drama bullshit. Oh my god, she's smoking weed. Oh my god, she's experimenting with another girl. Oh my god, she wants to have her own space and not live in Joel's house anymore. Because Joel is such a hard ass. And yes, there is still the underlying conflict of Ellie knowing deep down that Joel lied to her, but it's caked in with this dumb bullshit that I can't care any less about. And Ellie's breaking point in the show is instead Joel killing Ralph Eugene, who is the husband of a therapist in Jackson who got infected just outside of the town. Ellie notes that Eugene still has some time before his infection fully takes over, and Eugene wants to say some final words to his wife before he's put down. Joel lies to both Ellie and Eugene that he'll allow him to see his wife, and when Joel is alone with Eugene, he just ends up killing Eugene anyway. I don't really understand why this change was needed. The gravity of realizing that your father figure stole what you thought was your purpose away from you. You were hailed as the final beacon of hope for humanity. What were the stakes surrounding that? Not big enough somehow? You had to instead expand upon a character who we never actually see in the game. All we know about Eugene in the game is that he was some 75-year-old pothead who left his family to join the Fireflies where he met Tommy, and then he went to go live in Jackson where he died of a stroke before the events of the game even began. I understand why they expanded upon Bill's character in the first season. Bill was a character that we spent a decent amount of time with in the first game, but Eugene, what Joel did in the Firefly Hospital was already morally gray enough, and already enough to justify Ellie cutting him off. I just don't see why this additional rift was needed. And most of what I talked about in this video really ties into what is probably my biggest issue with this season. Ellie's demeanor, Dina seemingly being the only fucking one to take this revenge quest seriously, the reveal of Abby's motivation behind killing Joel, the needless expansion of Eugene, the teenage drama bullshit, etc. It all saps out any emotion I feel for the big scene where Ellie and Joel are talking on his porch. This is the most crucial scene in the game. It gives the player the exact reason why Ellie is so consumed by her hatred for Abby and her thirst for revenge. Not just because Abby took her surrogate father away from her, but also because the anger and desperation you see from Ellie throughout this game is a manifestation of what she feels about herself. The porch scene reveals that they were going to reconcile and finally make up for the time they spent drifted apart. On top of the trauma she received from watching Joel die, she is also wrapped up in immense regret that she spends so much time resenting him and avoiding him, and when she finally decides to mend their relationship, her opportunity at reconciliation is snatched the fuck away, and that is yet another layer on top of the already very obvious reasons as to why her trauma consumes her so much. And in the game, this revelation is saved for the very end. In the show, it's mashed in an episode with a whole bunch of other flashbacks. All of this information surrounding Ellie and Joel's deteriorating relationship is thrown at you at once, instead of letting the narrative flow and showcasing Ellie's descent and saving this revelation for a future season after Ellie's desperate quest to Santa Barbara to kill Abby once and for all because she thinks that's going to solve her trauma. And that cutscene also provides context as to why Ellie spares Abby in the end. Because ultimately the person she is mad at the most is herself, and she thinks Abby's death will mend the guilt she feels. With this scene recontextualizing Ellie's rage throughout the game, I think the show pulled the trigger way too early when it comes to showing this scene in just the second season. So yeah, that's why I don't like the second season of The Last of Us. There are plenty of other things to talk about that this season got wrong, but I never intended for this video to be some super in-depth deep dive into everything this season got wrong. Hopefully season 3 is better, and even then we probably won't be getting that until until 2027 at the earliest. I hate how fucking long TV seasons take to make now. But even if Season 3 does Abby justice, I'll probably still be pissed off because they squandered Ellie's character so hard, and thus the strong parallel between the two characters, like there is in the game, will also be squandered. I've noticed that viewers who haven't played the games are more likely to say positive things about this season because they don't have the original source material to compare it to. And whatever, more power to them, and more power to the people who have played the games and still enjoyed this season. I know there are some of those people out there too. But for me, a lot of the changes in this season were just too jarring and harmed the narrative that I just couldn't find much enjoyment in watching this season. But yeah, I don't really talk about TV shows a whole lot on this channel, but I'm just such a fan of The Last of Us games that I really needed to vent about this fucking season on this channel. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Bye-bye.